All right, today we are going to talk a little bit about the concept of child find, which is kind of a misleading term. It sounds like we're missing children and we need to go find them, and that's really not what it is about. Child find essentially is about identifying students who need our special education and related services that we have to offer. And part of that is locating them in the first place. Not a super difficult task for kids that are in our buildings and who we get to see on a regular basis. We can locate those students. Sometimes we've got other students who are a little bit harder to actually locate because maybe they haven't even come to school yet. And then we have to identify through the evaluation process who actually needs special education. I think we all know that within public schools and outside of public schools, that we have some kids that struggle that don't need special education. They don't have a disability, but they still struggle nonetheless. And we've got lots of different things out there to support students through interventions, through other programs. But we have a very specific process to figure out who actually needs special education and related services. So overall, when we think about child find, it kind of is presented in the law as kind of just and this is where we start. This is one of our obligations as school corporations out there. But it is not an easy task. Even though there's not a lot written about it in the law, it's a pretty daunting undertaking to say, we are going to commit to finding all of the kids and getting them connected with the services that they need when it comes to special ed and related services. So what exactly is involved in that? Well, in the first place, there has to be communications out there so that people outside of our school and inside of our school know that when a student has a disability, we've got services. We have programs, we have activities, we have forms and processes and all of that sort of thing. And you would kind of think that, well, people just know that. Not everybody does. And in fact, new parents who maybe have a child that is struggling, many of them don't know what we do. They know that there are services out there, but they don't understand some of the concepts of the things like that what we do in schools is free, and that it's part of what we do for any student that needs it. They may not know that our services start at age 3 until a child is turning 22. So there are a lot of things out there that we need to share information. So part of our activities are around just letting people know that we support students with disabilities. That would also include people in the community. So people in doctors' offices, people in daycares, churches, any kind of place that tends to support parents and young children and older children. They just need to know that we've got a lot to offer. People also have to know how in the world they get this stuff started. I guess I didn't introduce myself, but I'm Angie McKinney, and I'm with the IEP Technical Assistance Center. And we frequently get parents who call into the center, even though we're not really a parent support, but they call in and just say, hey, somebody told me my child might need an IEP, and so I'm calling you to get that started, because they don't know how to get the process started. So how to access that whole process for support, evaluation, any of that kind of stuff has to be very clear. not only to parents, but to teachers within our buildings. They need to know when they have a concern about a student, what's the next step? Even sometimes, what's the first step? Who do I tell? What form do I complete? Doctors' offices need to know that they can't just write something on a prescription pad that says IEP for this student. That if they have good information to share with parents, then parents can be empowered to come into the school and feel a little bit more confident about how do I even get in the door? We have to always be vigilant about looking for students. Now, we do that in a lot of different ways, and we'll talk about some of the different activities that are part of that. But we don't just wait until the squeaky wheel comes up, right? We don't wait until we necessarily get a parent referral. Your teachers are always looking at data and saying, hey, I think something might be up with this student, that they need some additional support. Beyond the students we have in our building, sometimes we're even looking when a parent comes in for parent-teacher conferences and they've got that 4-year-old with them that we happen to notice this child is 4 years old and they're not talking yet, or they may be having significant motor difficulties, or just things like that. It's part of what we do to say, hey, we have a process to be able to evaluate preschool students and, to provide that information. So we're always looking for those students. We also have a lot of students that are within our geographic location that maybe are homeschooled, maybe attend a local parochial school or another private school or a Montessori school that is not necessarily part of our corporation. And those are our students as well. And our Child Find obligations stretch beyond the kids who walk through our door. Oh, I guess I already talked about this. We're always looking for any students, and that's a challenging part sometimes. So again, we'll talk about some activities that are related to that. And then part of it has to do with being comfortable with identifying what looks like a potential disability. So again, we have many students who might struggle but don't necessarily have a disability. And working with your speech pathologists, your school psychologists, your autism consultants, anyone that is within your building that has an expertise in disability, your special ed teachers, my goodness, they've worked with all students that have different kinds of disabilities. They know the signs, right? They are able to tell you, yes, this student is struggling, but what I'm seeing is this kiddo has missed, 20 days of school in the first semester, and that might account for what's going on. Or yes, this student is struggling, but if this student maybe had an intellectual disability, we would likely see A, B, and C. So being able to identify those signs is an important piece, but part of that comes out in the evaluation process. So when we are confused about whether or not a student might have a disability, or whether we're kind of on the fence, that's a good time to do an evaluation to be able to rule in or rule out some of those different concern areas. So that's a lot, right? When you think of having to be able to accomplish all this as part of your Child Find obligation under the federal and the state law, these are a lot of really important things. So here is exactly what it says within Article 7. And Article 7 is our state law in Indiana for special ed. And specifically about Child Find, it says we're going to establish public agencies, so that is your school corporation, shall establish, maintain, and implement. So we can't just have it in writing. We actually have to put it into practice. Written procedures to make sure that we're locating, identifying, and evaluating every kiddo who is in need of special education and related services. So whether it's a mild disability or a severe disability, any student between ages 3 and 22, if they have a need for special education, then we need to be on the lookout and have an active process in place to be able to evaluate and identify these students. Now, this includes all the kids who live within our district. So legal settlement within your district's catchment area, that includes those kids. It also includes all these other kids too, though. So students who are in a non-public school, so your parochial schools, your private schools, or are served by an agency or live in an institution. So whether it's a group home or residential facility or anything like that, that is within your area, those are our kids too. Students who are identified as homeless. So they may be in our area and maybe not permanently, but they're ours when they're here. And if we become aware of them and we have to actively be looking, then we're identifying and evaluating them as well. Students who are wards of the state, so they may not have somebody who is quite on top of looking for disability or advocating within the process. Students who are highly mobile, and that includes our students who are migrant students. And they specifically point out that students who we think might be a student with a disability, but they're still moving from grade to grade. So sometimes we have kids who are kind of skimming that line and they're progressing on from one grade to the next, not necessarily being retained because they're just skimming. But again, if we suspect that they have a disability and need specially designed instruction that is part of special education, then if they need an evaluation to determine that, then we're responsible for that as well. So again, it's a big task. Now, the Department of Education at the federal level has put together some potential activities, and these are not exhaustive. There are lots of different things. I've seen some really creative things that different districts have done as part of Child Find. But you can see there are a lot of things on here, and we're going to break these apart kind of piece by piece, starting with the first one. So the first thing is they recommend some public awareness campaigns, looking at a lot of different areas. So this is a great opportunity to do things like making a flyer that can be handed out at different places or sent out as, available as part of your kindergarten roundup. If you're already bringing kids in, but realizing that some of those kids that you may not catch otherwise because they're not yet on your radar, they may be going into daycares. They may be going to the local pediatrician's office or things like that. Sometimes offering to come to speak can be helpful too, because there is definitely kind of a disconnect between a lot of providers' offices and what we do in public schools. And I spent many years as a school psychologist, and I was getting like really inappropriate referrals from a particular pediatrician's office. And so I just asked if I could go in and talk with them and say, let me tell you how it works here. I know how it works in the medical world. Not exactly the same. And so just sharing that information out about here's how a family could best access our kind of services, clearing up some of those misconceptions, all of those things can be really helpful. There are a lot of different camp kinds of activities that may be around your area, churches, things like that, where you could send out some information or go to speak. It's also a really nice idea if you can be able to get a link to your special education information that's already on your website and send that direct link to a variety of different places that they could post on their website where they have some parent resources. Getting that kind of crossed over exposure is really good because some parents may never think to go to the school corporation and start looking for special education. But if they are already looking at their daycare's website or their church's website or something like that, and they see your link, they may have a higher likelihood of being able to look at that. Okay, the next thing is your universal screening and benchmarking procedures. And for a lot of schools, this is part of your RTI or MTSS kind of process. But we use this information to be able to kind of get the total big picture of what's going on in our buildings, right? It doesn't tell us everything. But if you have NWEA, if you have acuity, if you have dibbles or any of those kinds of universal screenings or benchmarking data sets in your buildings, you use that to be able to see at least where are the red flags and the yellow flags. And when you see these, you start looking into some other data that you have. If you have a student that's popping up as a red flag because their reading is really, really low, you don't just automatically say, oh my gosh, that's a student with a disability. You're going to look at classroom data. You're going to look at historical data and try and get a picture of maybe the student might have a learning disability. Maybe the student might have something else going on, or is it just that we need to put some more interventions in place? So your data is guiding you through what you need to do instructionally as a building, as a grade level, as a classroom, and on an individual basis for a student. It helps to really shape your intervention process in the building, but it also can lead to some child find. Many school buildings are using their data to eventually take a look at an individual student who might be a student with disability. And this data is invaluable in trying to determine some of that. One of the things that they are very clear about, though, is that having a good intervention process is wonderful, and you should. I would definitely encourage you to have a good intervention process within your buildings. However, that in and of itself is not enough to satisfy that child find requirement because there is so much more beyond the scope of the kids who are in your building. It doesn't catch the kids who aren't there. It doesn't catch some of our students who come and go pretty quickly. So definitely do it, but don't let this be your only activity. One of the other things that they suggest is getting involved in some of the screening related to students who go to private schools and homeschool students. Now, they're just like any other school, including public schools. There is a very big range in quality of different private schools and in how homeschooling occurs. So I'm sure it's no surprise to anybody, and I don't think any of you would argue with me that you know some of your schools and some of your homeschool situations that are really strong. And you probably have some homeschool students that you wonder if any instruction ever occurs. And that's just a fact. When you remove some of the regulations that we have in public schools, you get just a variety of how things happen, and some are much better than others. So in order to really think about if there are students out there that aren't in our buildings that might have a disability and might be in need of services, if you can include those students to be able to come in and get screening, or you go to them and help with some of the screening, do a little bit of that outreach kind of work, then you may be able to capture some of those. Maybe encouraging students who don't want to come to public school for kindergarten, but just letting parents know, hey, but you can still bring them in. We can do a quick assessment. We can give you some feedback on what we see. And then you don't necessarily have to commit to going here. Building those relationships with your non-public schools is really important in order to be able to capture those students. Meeting with mental health practitioners, just like with physical health practitioners, your pediatrician's office, there sometimes is very much a disconnect between what they do and what we do. And especially if you're talking about mental health and some of our students that have behavioral and social emotional needs, there is a difference in who qualifies for what and what it really means. So you could have a student who's getting outside counseling. That doesn't necessarily mean that they need special education. It might, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. So there's not a one-to-one correspondence between, hey, if I get this in the outside world, I'm going to need this in schools. So the more that we can connect with those mental health practitioners, and a lot of times, again, this is going to be your school psychologist or your school counselors or your special ed teachers, especially your teachers of students with emotional disabilities. Making those connections is really important. Having those relations providers that maybe come into your building. So I'm not sure within your district whether or not you have mental health that is being provided from an outside source on school property. A lot of schools have that. Whether you do or whether you don't, having any outside mental health people, just have a good relationship with them can help them to understand, hey, when I get a kid and I see they're really struggling with this, here's what I can provide to the parents to have them bring into the school to kind of share the right information. Same thing goes with other nonprofits out there. So you may want to pause this and just have some conversation about who are those organizations in your area. Some of you may know and work with them on a regular basis, and some of your staff may really not know who is there. So what kind of nonprofits are there, and how might you be able to funnel some information through them and maybe connect with some of the parents who work really well with those groups, but who don't want to come into the schools. And, I think we get a lot of parents who maybe didn't have the most pleasant school experience when they were growing up for whatever reason. And they are really hesitant to seek out services and supports for their own children because it means having conversations. It means showing up to meetings. And sometimes just the thought of that is kind of overwhelming for some parents. Making sure that we coordinate with other agencies out there that are providing services. Now, one that really comes to mind for me, since our services in public schools start at age 3, we have an obligation that if a student before age 3 is part of the first step system, so they're already working with professionals because they had delays as an infant, then our obligation under state and federal law is that we are working with those early intervention agencies so that a student gets evaluated and has services ready to start on their 3rd birthday, which means we're evaluating kids when they're still 2. And it's incredibly important that we have those good relationships with First Steps so that we don't miss those kids. Because again, parents without First Steps, parents don't know to come to us to say, hey, my kiddo was already getting, some family support, some developmental therapy, some speech therapy, some occupational therapy, any of those kinds of things as a baby, and now they're turning 3. So First Steps knows this. Our early childhood folks within your district, they know this, and they make those things happen. So that is one piece, but we also have other agencies that help to provide services to our students that we have to work with as well, even as they get a little older. Some of our students are starting to be supported by activities through vocational rehabilitation. We may have students that are connected through the juvenile justice system, for better or worse. If we can coordinate some of the things that we have going on at the school with people that we know in juvenile justice and people at, the child services, they are seeing some of the things that we may not be privy to until somebody can sit down and share some information. So again, they need to know what we do, we need to know what they do, and we need to find that overlap to make sure that we're not missing any kids. Our students who are homeless can sometimes be a big challenge. When a family is in a situation where they suddenly are homeless, school and making sure that kids get what they need at school is low on the totem pole of needs, right? Sometimes you have families that are just trying to stay safe, especially in a domestic violence kind of situation. They may be living with other people temporarily. They may be living out of their car at a shelter. They're actively looking for housing, employment, food, all of those kinds of things. And so sometimes they may not be thinking about the other stuff. And if we can share some information with some of those different programs so that they have some good information to give out, and then we may be able to find some people who now are suddenly in our area and we just didn't even know yet. Because I think if I were somebody who suddenly found myself homeless, making sure my kid didn't miss a day of school and seeking out supports there would probably not be at the top of my list. I would think, okay, it's okay if they just don't go to school for a while until we figure this out. Well, we know that when a kid is homeless and they're in our area, we've got to provide what they need. We need to have them in school. We need to have them supported. So maybe have a quick conversation within your group about what programs do you have? Are there shelters? Are there sometimes are shelters that you may not know about, especially domestic violence shelters? Their locations are often kept fairly under the radar. Are there Section 8 coordinators in your area who are working with families to try and get them housing that they can stay in? Those are some people that you want to make friends with and you want to share information with. Posting things on your website. So that's a great place to put information. And then also sharing out through social media. Take a look at what is on your website currently. When you click on the special education page, if there is one, what is on there? Sometimes I will look at a school's special ed tab on their corporation website, and it is chock full of resources. It's providing all sorts of things. And sometimes it talks about the people who you might need to contact. And sometimes it doesn't have much of anything. So take a look at what's on there and think about, are the things that are on our website that a parent could potentially access, are they in parent-friendly language? Like, are parents going to get it when they read this stuff, or is it another legal kind of document that nobody wants to read? Does it tell them on this website what to do or who to contact? Does it give them some key resources that might be helpful? Some other links, such as a link to InSource, which is our state's parent information center. You might consider occasional blasts on your social media about different opportunities that parents may have, like a parent information night, something that gives them some information about disability, about special education, that maybe gives them an opportunity to come and learn about how to support students with attention difficulties, or, just anything like that that you might be able to put out there. This is an opportunity for Child Find, because not all the parents who get these messages are parents of a child that is currently identified. Sometimes it is a parent who attends something like that and goes, oh my gosh, that is my kid to a T. Maybe they do have a disability. Maybe they do need support because I'm doing all these things at home that are trying to support them, and maybe it's not enough. So just thinking about lots of different things you could do. And again, this really is not an exhaustive list. You may want to stop and have a conversation about what other things do you do? What things are supporting being able to locate, identify, and evaluate any student who needs a disability? So just a couple of key things that I want you to really think about as you are kind of walking away from this. Again, having an intervention process is an absolutely wonderful thing to do, but they are not Child Find in and of themselves. How you use the data is part of Child Find, definitely. Think about all of the different information that you might want to provide to parents. We do on our website, which is iepta.org. On our website, if you look at some of the learning information, there is a Padlet of information for parents, and you are welcome to link or download any of those documents and upload those onto your website as well. We have a handout that specifically talks about each disability area and tries to put it in a little more parent-friendly language. We have some handouts on preparing for an evaluation, understanding test scores, things like that that are kind of difficult, not only for parents to understand, but for anybody who's not one of the evaluators to understand. Make sure that you have a really good understanding about, here is our data and what are we doing with it. And again, part of what we do with it is to adjust our instruction. Part of what we do with the data is to determine interventions, but part of the data is also to say, yeah, this is really pointing to this student having a disability. Continue to try those interventions, continue to adjust instruction, but there hits a point with students who have a disability that we can identify, hey, I think this is something that is going to require ongoing specially designed instruction. There also was a specific memo that went out from the federal government quite a few years ago now, probably more than 10 years ago, that specifically said participation in RTI or MTSS cannot be used to delay or deny a request for initial evaluation. And so what that means is that again, it's great to have intervention process. And it's also great to offer that to a parent, to a teacher, that we'd really like to try some interventions first. And when they agree, that is fine. But what we can't do is say that a student has to go through so many weeks of intervention before we can grant a request for an initial evaluation, because that's not a requirement in the law. So just make sure that the language that staff is using is, we want to encourage interventions. It should just be about the way we do education, is that we are always trying different things. But we can't deny an evaluation based on not participating, not having been in a process long enough, any of those kinds of things. So hopefully this stuff makes sense. You are always welcome to reach out to somebody within the IEP TA Center, just to get some additional information, or to ask for some support around, hey, what else could we do related to child fine? As part of using this video, again, I would encourage you to have some group conversations at this point about what do we actually do? What do we already have? What do we want to do next that would help enhance our child fine process? And what are we maybe doing that is contrary to some of the stuff that I've talked about? So are we doing anything that we need to eliminate? Or do we need to do some new stuff? And what do we want to celebrate that we're already doing, to be able to identify all of these students? Thank you very much and have a great day.